Have you ever found yourself sitting across from someone, a friend, a lover, perhaps even a stranger, and suddenly realizing that you're no longer listening to their words, you're observing instead? The subtle pause before their answer, the smile that flickers but never fully blooms, the reassurance offered too quickly, as if rehearsed for moments like this. And in that instant, something within you knows. You catch the hidden layer beneath their tone, the quiet tension in their gestures, the emotion they're trying to conceal. For a brief moment, awareness feels like power. Then it feels like exhaustion. No one warns you that seeing through people comes with a cost. What once felt like wisdom begins to feel like distance. You start to notice everything, and in doing so, you stop feeling part of it. There's an invisible glass between you and the world. You can perceive every truth behind it, but touch none of it. Awareness was meant to protect you. It was meant to refine your empathy, not imprison it. Yet somewhere along the path of self-understanding, awareness turned into isolation. A silent X between truth and tenderness, where clarity replaces connection. This is a reflection on that quiet exile, on how overanalysis, once a shield, can become a wall. But more importantly, it's an invitation to return, to rediscover connection without surrendering your insight, to see but also to feel. Because the burden was never that you saw too much, it's that you forgot the beauty of simply being human. Part 1: When emotional intelligence becomes emotional exile. You're sitting across from someone you care about. They're speaking, telling you about their day, about some conflict at work or a small irritation with a friend. The tone is casual, their words light, but your mind is already elsewhere, 3 layers beneath the surface. Why did they say it that way? Why that specific example? Was that a test? Was it about me? You nod at the right moments. You respond with empathy. But beneath the stillness of your expression, you are dissecting every syllable, measuring tone against history, decoding motives as if truth were a hidden code you were born to solve. And when they notice your distance, "You okay?" You seem distracted. You smile and say, "No, I'm listening." But the truth is, you're tired. Not of them, but of the constant vigilance that has replaced presence. You are no longer in conversation. You are conducting surveillance. There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from seeing too much. It isn't physical or mental. It's emotional fatigue, the weariness of never being able to simply believe what's being said. Once people called it a gift. You're so perceptive. You read people so well. Nothing gets past you, and it felt good to understand what others missed, to hear what wasn't said, to sense truth before it was spoken. But over time, perception hardened into habit. You began noticing everything: the tightness in a jaw, the flat tone in a smile, the way someone suddenly withdrew after your vulnerability. You became fluent in subtext, undertones, and hidden motives until awareness no longer felt like wisdom. It felt like exile. When you can see the architecture behind every interaction, the patterns of defense, the small manipulations, the fears disguised as charm, something tender slips away. Connection becomes calculation. Presence becomes prediction. You are no longer walking beside people. You are studying them from afar. This didn't happen by accident. Hyper-awareness is rarely born from peace. It evolves from fear. Maybe you grew up in a house where moods shifted like weather, where you learned to read danger before it arrived. Or perhaps someone once betrayed you deeply and you made a vow never again. I'll see it coming next time. And so you trained your mind into a blade sharp, precise, and always ready. You learned to spot lies before they formed, to sense manipulation before it touched you. It worked for a while. You avoided harm, predicted pain, stayed one step ahead. But the same vigilance that kept you safe also keeps you alone. When your reflex is to scan for threat, you begin to see threat everywhere. A friend's silence becomes rejection. A partner's hesitation becomes deceit. A kind gesture becomes strategy. You turn emotional intelligence into emotional surveillance, and surveillance requires distance. The Stoics warned of this paradox. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He never suggested blindness. He suggested discernment. To see without obsession. To notice without interpreting everything as danger. To ask not, should I see this, but does seeing this serve my peace or my fear? Because perception without boundaries is not wisdom. It is fatigue. You begin to live in constant analysis, mistaking interpretation for intimacy. You drift quietly into emotional exile, not because others rejected you, but because you withdrew first to a vantage point where safety replaced connection. And here lies the deeper paradox. The more accurately you understand someone, the less you may feel connected to them. Understanding belongs to the mind-structured, vigilant, protective. Connection belongs to the heart, uncertain, raw, alive. When you spend your life decoding others, you lose the capacity to simply be with them. You listen to grief, but analyze the attachment behind it. You receive affection, but scan for motive. You interpret so deeply that you forget how to feel. Awareness becomes exile when understanding replaces empathy. And the fortress you built to protect your heart becomes the prison that keeps love from entering, even from those who never meant you harm. Part 2. When connection becomes a puzzle you can't stop solving. There comes a quiet turning point in many relationships. Romantic, friendly, or professional, when you stop experiencing the person in front of you and begin solving them. It starts subtly. They say something slightly off, a tone that doesn't fit the moment, a pause that lingers too long. Your mind, trained to detect irregularities, raises a silent alarm. What does that mean? And just like that, you're no longer present. You're reviewing past conversations, cross-checking emotional data, building hypotheses to explain a mystery that may not even exist. They keep talking. You keep nodding. But the part of you that feels has gone quiet. What remains is the observer, detached, intelligent, and utterly alone. You've turned intimacy into analysis, and you don't know how to stop. Every gesture becomes evidence. Every silence becomes data. I once knew someone, let's call her Maya, who timed almost subconsciously how long it took her partner to say, "I love you" back. Yesterday it was instant, she'd say. Today, 2 seconds. Why the delay? 2 seconds, a breath, a swallow, a thought. But to her it was a signal, a clue, a deviation from emotional equilibrium. That is the cost of an analytical mind. When it takes over the emotional self, every moment becomes a code to decipher rather than a feeling to inhabit. A short text becomes rejection. A small shift in tone becomes betrayal. Averted eyes become proof of deceit. You build elaborate maps of human behavior, searching for meaning in the smallest inflection until you forget that sometimes there is none. Because people are not systems. They are inconsistent, messy, and gloriously unpredictable. Someone says okay instead of okay because they're tired. They pause because they're thinking, not plotting. They forget to smile because they're human. But to the vigilant mind, randomness feels unbearable. Predictability is safety. So you choose certainty over curiosity, control over connection. Curiosity asks gently, I wonder what they're feeling right now, and allows space for mystery. But the craving for certainty demands I need to know what they're feeling right now. It cannot rest until it finds an answer, even a wrong one. And so you stop asking open questions. You start interrogating disguised as care. You seem distant is something wrong, sounds kind, but it's often a verdict. Are we okay? Sounds vulnerable, but it's a test. You're no longer exploring. You're confirming what your fear already believes. What your mind is doing feels intelligent, but it's not intimacy. It's interference. Your analytical brain, governed by the prefrontal cortex, hijacks the neural circuits designed for empathy. Instead of mirroring emotion, you simulate it. Instead of feeling with someone, you build a model of how you think they feel. It's like watching a movie while listening to the director explain every shot. You understand the structure, but the story no longer moves you. You think your awareness brings you closer, but it doesn't. It quietly builds a wall of comprehension that blocks the warmth of connection. A friend once told me after a perfect date, I spent the whole night analyzing his tone, his timing, his intentions. I can't even remember how I felt. That's the hidden cost of constant vigilance. You stop living the moment because you're too busy managing it. You attend a party, but you monitor your every word. You lie beside someone, but you're tracking their breath for meaning. You sit with a friend, but you're studying the rhythm of their replies instead of hearing their heart. You've become both the participant and the observer, and the observer never lets the participant breathe. And maybe that's the real reason you stay in your head. Control feels safer than surrender. Thinking can't hurt you. Feeling can. So you live behind the glass, safe, sharp, untouchable, trying to decode affection rather than receive it. You convince yourself that one more insight, one more pattern will give you peace. But deep down, you know the truth. The puzzle was never meant to be solved. It was meant to be felt. And the mystery you've been trying to decode was never about them. It has always been about you and what you fear might happen if you finally stop analyzing and let yourself simply be. Part 3. The hidden fear beneath overthinking. Let's be honest about what you're really afraid of. It isn't lies you've heard them before and lived through the sting. It isn't abandonment people have left and you're still here. What you fear most is what those moments feel like. That instant when you realize you missed the signs. when you have to face that you were open with someone who didn't deserve it, when your stomach drops and your mind whispers, "I should have known. I should have seen it coming." That fear not of loss, but of humiliation, is what drives the endless analysis. You're not studying people because you want to understand them. You're studying them to make sure you'll never feel blindsided again. You're not guarding your mind, you're guarding against your own pain. And it started long before adulthood. Maybe in a home where moods shifted like storms and safety depended on how quickly you could read the sky. You learned to notice the smallest signs: a sigh, a slammed cabinet, a silence that meant danger. Or maybe it began with someone who once made you feel completely seen until you discovered you were only being observed. In that moment, something hardened. You made a vow. Never again will I be caught unaware. So you learned to think 3 steps ahead, to analyze, predict, and protect. It worked for a while. You did avoid some heartbreak. You did see some truths early. But eventually vigilance became habit even when you were safe. The guard never stood down. The threat was gone, but the pattern remained. You turned a survival instinct into a lifestyle. Your mind became both shield and prison. Carl Jung once spoke of the shadow, the hidden twin of our most noble traits. Overanalysis, he might say, is empathy's shadow. It looks like care, but it's control disguised as compassion. You tell yourself you're attentive, emotionally intelligent, perceptive. You notice what others miss. But beneath that attentiveness is fear, the need to stay in control of a world that once hurt you when you weren't. A true empath feels with people. The overanalyzer feels about them, observing emotion instead of sharing it, translating connection into information, building psychological maps instead of living the moment. It feels like love, but it's really strategy. And the question is no longer, who am I protecting? It's what part of me am I refusing to trust? Because the truth is, overanalyzers don't distrust others. They distrust themselves. You don't doubt their intentions as much as you doubt your ability to survive if they fail you. If you believed deeply instinctively that you could endure betrayal, disappointment, and loss, you wouldn't need to predict them. You would live freely knowing you could recover from whatever came. But you don't believe that yet. Somewhere deep down you fear that if you let your guard down and get hurt, it will destroy you, or worse, prove that your control was an illusion. So you stay alert. You measure. You scan. You turn relationships into risk assessments, not because the people in your life are dangerous, but because feeling is dangerous. And here lies the quiet tragedy in trying so hard to avoid the pain of betrayal, you create the ache of distance. You treat conversations like investigations. You share pieces of yourself while watching their every reaction. You listen, but not to connect, to detect. You love, but not to surrender, to study. And people sense it. They feel your caution, your subtle testing, the invisible checklist behind every word. So they begin performing, choosing their responses carefully. And when you notice that shift, you take it as proof that you were right not to trust them. The pattern feeds itself. The fortress fortifies. You built these walls for good reasons. Every brick carries a memory, a vow, a scar. You believed safety required separation, and for a time it did. But no one tells you that a fortress left unattended becomes a cell. The walls that keep pain out also keep love out. The vigilance that once protected you now starves you. And when the night grows quiet, you can hear it, the fatigue of constant guarding, the loneliness of being your own sentry. You are not afraid of others. You are afraid of yourself, of what might surface if you stop controlling of how it would feel to truly need someone and risk being disappointed. So you analyze. You stay awake in your mind because it feels safer than falling asleep in your heart. You call it wisdom, but wisdom asks a deeper question. What am I protecting, and at what cost? Because the part of you hiding behind all this understanding, the one who longs to trust, to feel, to live without armor, is still waiting. Waiting for you to realize that the opposite of overthinking isn't ignorance, it's courage. And courage doesn't mean you'll never be hurt again. It means you finally believe you can survive it. Part 4. When over-understanding kills warmth. There's a quiet kind of death that enters relationships not through betrayal or conflict, but through overthinking. It arrives slowly, invisibly. A word misread. A tone misjudged. A silence mistaken for distance. You begin to pull back just a little to protect yourself. They sense it but can't name it, so they retreat too. Their confusion confirms your suspicion that something must be wrong. And without realizing it, you both drift apart, one trapped in the mind, the other in the ache of not understanding why the closeness has cooled. Overthink, misread, withdraw, confirm disconnection. That's the freeze loop, and it destroys more love than incompatibility ever will. Because love by nature needs flow. It needs room to move, to stumble, to breathe. It's meant to be messy, spontaneous, unpredictable, sometimes irrational. It thrives on small surprises, a clumsy word that still carries tenderness. A pause that feels peaceful instead of ominous. A moment of quiet where presence says more than speech ever could. But when you demand understanding before feeling, when every gesture must be decoded before it can be received, love begins to lose its warmth. Overanalysis sterilizes what it tries to protect. It's like studying the sheet music of a song without ever letting yourself hear it. You might understand its structure, the rhythm, the notes, the precision, but you'll miss what it was meant to do to move you. That's the tragedy of being too conscious. Awareness in its healthy form is a gift. It allows reflection, empathy, self-regulation. But when it becomes constant observation, it turns into fatigue. You monitor your own words, track their reactions, measure the emotional temperature of every exchange until the conversation stops being a dialogue and becomes a performance. You think you're being mindful, but you've simply replaced connection with control. It's like watching the sunset through analysis, noting the color, calculating the angle of light, and missing the moment entirely. To the other person, this over-awareness feels like inspection, not intimacy. They feel measured, not met, studied, not seen. Every word feels heavier than intended. Every gesture feels observed rather than received. It's like being loved by someone who's always taking notes, present in body, absent in soul. And though you believe your attentiveness is proof of care, what they feel is distance. Because there is a difference between being understood and being allowed to simply be. Eventually, they close up not out of secrecy, but exhaustion. No one wants to love under surveillance. And in that closing, the very thing you were trying to protect, closeness, disappears. Dissection always begins with curiosity, but it ends with silence. In science, when you dissect something to understand how it works, it dies in the process. Love is no different. When you pull it apart to test its strength, to verify its authenticity, it can't survive the scrutiny. Some things are only alive when you stop dissecting and start trusting. You can't think your way into safety. You can't analyze your way into love. At some point, you must let go of the need for certainty, because certainty and love cannot coexist. The Stoics understood this long before psychology gave it language. Epictetus taught, "You cannot control external events, only your responses to them." The goal was never control. The goal was constancy. To stay steady when life refuses to make sense. To meet uncertainty not with suspicion, but with strength. To build a peace so rooted that it doesn't depend on prediction. That's the path forward for the overthinker. To stop trying to eliminate uncertainty and start cultivating resilience. To use perception not as armor, but as awareness that deepens compassion. Because you'll never be safe through understanding alone. You'll be safe when you stop needing to understand everything to feel secure. So keep your insight, keep your depth, keep your capacity to see beyond the surface. But also allow yourself to feel again, without proof, without analysis, without your mind standing guard at the door. Put down the clipboard. Let the moment unfold. Because the soul of connection was never meant to be studied. It was meant to be lived. Part 5. Learning to feel again without losing your mind. The hardest part of healing isn't learning to see clearly. It's learning to see clearly and stay soft anyway. Because what truly terrifies you about feeling without analyzing first isn't the act of feeling itself. It's the fear of becoming who you once were before you learned to guard yourself, before you developed the skill to read between the lines, before you were wounded for being too open. You believe your choice is binary, remain hypervigilant and safe, but lonely, or drop your guard and risk devastation. But there's a third way, one you've never truly tried. What if you could keep your insight, but change what you do with it? What if you could notice patterns without building stories? Sense subtext without interrogating it? Stay aware but not armored. What if the goal was never to see less, but to need less from what you see? This is the quiet art of feeling before you frame of experiencing. Before you explain of allowing a moment to move through you, before your mind turns it into meaning. And it begins with one simple act. One breath. The one breath practice. Someone you care about says something that sets off your inner alarm. Maybe it's a tone, a word, a pause. Instinctively, your mind leaps into motion. What did they mean by that? Is something wrong? Should I ask or stay quiet? But instead of spiraling, you pause. You take one slow breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. And in that breath, you ask a single question. What does this feel like before I decide what it means? Not what does this mean? Not what should I do? Just what does this feel like? Perhaps it feels uncertain or tight or quietly sad. That's enough, because when you rush to analyze, you're not seeking understanding, you're trying to escape the discomfort of not knowing. But if you let yourself feel before explaining, something shifts. The urgency softens, the narrative loosens, and suddenly you have space to respond, not react. Curiosity instead of decoding. When the mind calms, a new choice appears. The choice between decoding and curiosity. Decoding asks questions to control. You seem distant. Is it because of what I said earlier? The words sound caring, but the subtext says, I've already built a theory. Please confirm it so I can stop feeling anxious. Curiosity asks questions to connect. Hey, I'm noticing I feel a little distant right now. Do you feel that too, or is it just me? This version admits uncertainty and makes room for reality, not projection. One posture seeks certainty, the other seeks truth. One creates defensiveness, the other creates safety. And paradoxically, when people feel curiosity instead of suspicion, they begin to open. They stop performing. They trust you with what's real. Selective perception. Knowing what to notice. Learning to feel again doesn't mean ignoring your sensitivity. Your ability to read people is not the problem. The problem is believing every detail deserves dissection. This is where selective perception becomes wisdom, knowing what to notice and what to release. Notice patterns that persist, not single moments. Notice contradictions between words and actions, not small inconsistencies. Notice when your body says unsafe, not just uncomfortable, but release the noise. The tone that changed slightly, the delayed text, the pause that could mean anything or nothing. Ask yourself, does this serve my peace or feed my fear? If it feeds fear, let it pass. If it serves peace, pay attention. You don't need to notice less. You only need to attach less meaning to what you notice. Trust as coexistence. Trust has never meant certainty. Trust means allowing uncertainty and safety to coexist. For years, you've mistaken control for peace, believing you'll finally feel secure once you can predict everything. But control is not safety. It's imprisonment. Real trust whispers, I don't know what tomorrow brings. I can't prevent disappointment. And still, I choose openness. Not because you're naive, but because you understand that connection is worth more than isolation. That courage is a better shield than suspicion. Actual danger demands boundaries. Fear of imagined pain demands courage. And the paradox is this: the more you can tolerate uncertainty, the deeper your capacity to love becomes. To understand less is sometimes to love more. Because love isn't a system to master, it's a state to experience. You don't need to know why someone loves you to allow it. You don't need to decode every word to feel its warmth. You don't need to solve someone to be close to them. One day of listening without labeling. So here's a small practice, a beginning. Choose one day to listen without labeling. No analysis, no interpretation, no search for subtext. When someone speaks, simply listen to their words, their tone, their humanness. When your mind starts dissecting, gently say, "Not now." Just listen. Let the moment speak before you do. Let the feeling land before you label it. Let the experience exist before you explain it. You'll start to see what analysis once hid from you. That people are often simpler, more honest, more open than your fear suggests. That connection deepens when you stop trying to control it. And that your awareness was never meant to separate you. It was meant to soften you. Insight was never armor. It was always meant to be a lens to see clearly, but also kindly. To see people not as puzzles to solve, but as travelers flawed and luminous just like you. And maybe that's where your journey ends, not in control, but in compassion. Because the one who most needs your gentleness, your patience, your willingness to feel without fixing is you. You, the exile, the overanalyzer, the one who learned to think because feeling once felt too dangerous. You don't need to choose between your mind and your heart anymore. You only need to let them work together, the mind to notice the heart, to decide what to do with what it sees. Think less, feel more, not as a weakness, as a homecoming. Part 6. The Exile Learns to Love Again. There is a stage of growth no one tells you about, the quiet space after awakening. You've learned to see clearly, to read between words, to understand the hidden mechanisms that shape human behavior. But you haven't yet made peace with what you see. It's the in-between, the exile. You're too aware to return to innocence, but too guarded to step into trust. If that's where you are now, hear this: you're not broken. You're not cursed for seeing too deeply. You're not too much or too damaged or too analytical to love again. You are evolving. This this painful, lonely, hypervigilant stage is not your ending. It's your passage. You had to leave naivety behind. You had to learn to discern, to protect, to observe. But you were never meant to stay behind the walls you built. You were meant to learn from them and then return. Not to blindness, but to something higher. The ability to see clearly and still choose love. What maturity actually looks like. At first, awareness feels like the final destination. You begin to see through facades, to detect manipulation, to decode motives. And for a time, it feels empowering. You think, now I'll never be fooled again. But then comes the exhaustion. The cold distance that clarity alone can't warm. You realize that seeing deeply doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it only brings loneliness. And you wonder if ignorance was easier. True maturity, however, isn't about seeing less. It's about knowing what to do with what you see. Maturity is noticing someone's defensiveness and choosing curiosity over withdrawal. It's recognizing fear behind someone's control and offering compassion instead of critique. It's perceiving inconsistency between words and actions and choosing to address it gently instead of collecting silent evidence. It's seeing both their wounds and your own and choosing understanding over pride. Maturity says, I see your flaws and I see mine. We're both learning, and I choose to stay present in that learning. This is how you return from exile, not by forgetting what you've learned, but by using it with grace. You stop being imprisoned by your perception. You become its steward. From observation to participation, healing from overanalysis means descending from the balcony of your mind and stepping back into the dance of life. You stop watching yourself relate and start relating. The true empath doesn't observe emotions from afar, they feel with. They sit in the uncertainty, the mess, the aliveness of connection. They stop treating people like case studies and start meeting them as companions. And the beauty of this shift is simple. You don't lose your insight, you just stop using it as a weapon. You can still notice when someone hides behind walls, but instead of diagnosing you, respond softly. I'm here when you're ready. You can still sense when someone's I'm fine hides a storm, but instead of analyzing their resistance, you offer your presence. You don't need to explain. I'm here. You still see the patterns, but you meet them with humanity instead of strategy. Because wisdom has taught you this, people don't need to be solved. They need to be seen. And when you stop trying to decode and simply begin to be with warmth returns, the conversation softens. The performance fades. Connection becomes what it was always meant to be, imperfect, alive, and real. Walking through noise without absorbing it. One of the great fears of healing minds is this. If I stop analyzing, won't I absorb everything? Won't I drown in other people's chaos? But awareness and protection can coexist. It's called discernment, the art of walking through noise without carrying it home. You can see someone's anxiety without adopting it. You can witness manipulation without becoming a victim of it. You can feel another's pain without trying to fix it. This isn't apathy, it's maturity. It's the understanding that compassion doesn't require absorption. You can think I see your struggle and I care, but I also know it's not mine to carry. You can say I notice the boundary test, and I'm not engaging in the test, but I'm here when you're ready for truth. You can remind yourself, the world may be chaotic, but I don't need to become the chaos. You used to notice everything because you feared everything. Now you notice everything and choose what deserves your energy. You've become permeable, but not porous, connected yet clear. Trust the cure you've been avoiding. The cure for overanalysis isn't ignorance. It isn't pretending not to see. It's trust. Not blind trust, not naive trust, but conscious, chosen trust, the kind that says, I see who you are, complex, imperfect human, and I choose to walk beside you. I trust myself to endure disappointment. I trust that I don't need certainty to be safe. I trust that connection, even with its risk, is still more alive than isolation. Trust means surrendering the illusion of control. It means accepting that no amount of vigilance can guarantee emotional safety. It means understanding that uncertainty is part of love's architecture, and that's what makes it sacred. Because the alternative, staying behind your own walls, isn't safety, it's slow suffocation. True wisdom, seeing clearly and loving. Anyway, you once thought wisdom meant seeing through people. Now you know it means seeing them and staying. Wisdom is catching fear behind defensiveness and responding to the fear, not the defense. It's feeling the impulse to analyze and saying, "Not this time. This time I'll feel instead." This is the other side of exile. Not innocence, not ignorance, but a tender, deliberate openness. A return to love with eyes wide open. You've learned to protect yourself. You know how to sense danger, how to see through deceit. That part of your education is complete. Now learn the part exile could never teach you. How to let someone in without scanning for exits. How to receive love without dissecting its motives. How to stay present even when uncertainty hums beneath the surface. You've learned enough to be safe. Now learn to be free. Love again, not despite complexity, but because of it. Because every contradiction, every imperfection you see in others mirrors your own humanity. Exile was never your destination. It was your initiation. You've walked its long corridors of solitude, sharpened your sight, learned its lessons. Now it's time to come home. Not to where you began, but to where you've been heading all along. To a self that sees clearly and still reaches out. That feels deeply without needing to control. That loves with eyes open and a heart unguarded. Because that is not weakness. That is wisdom. And you're ready for it. Outro, see without defense. Before you sleep tonight, try something different. Think of one conversation from today or this week that left you quietly tired. The one where you were more in your head than in your heart. Where you replayed every word, measured every pause, and tried to read what wasn't being said. This time, don't analyze it. Don't look for clues or hidden meanings. Just ask yourself, what did that moment feel like? Not what it meant, but what it felt like in your chest, in your breath, in that still space beneath thought, where truth usually whispers before the mind interrupts. Breathe into that feeling. Let it stay undefined. Let it remain unresolved. And then let go of the need to decode it. Let it simply be what it was, a moment between two imperfect people, both trying to be understood, both carrying their own unseen stories into the silence between them. Nothing to prove, nothing to solve. Because awareness and peace can exist together, but only when you stop turning love into logic. Only when you allow yourself to be moved without dissecting why. Only when you choose presence over protection, even when it feels uncertain. You don't have to choose between clarity and softness. You just have to practice seeing without defense. If this spoke to you, if you've lived in the exile of awareness, caught between truth and tenderness, right below, I see without defense. Let it be a quiet declaration, a reminder of where you're heading. And if you know someone who lives this way too, someone who feels too deeply, thinks too much, and can't stop seeing through things, share this with them. Not as a lesson, as an understanding. As a gentle way of saying, you're not alone. There's a way through. This is the conscious X, where awareness learns to rest, where seeing deeply no longer requires distance, and where you finally discover that the opposite of overanalysis isn't blindness. It's trust, and you are ready for it.